Just to kind of, before we actually get into the crux of the matter, I just want to give an overview of who we are, Grad Gurus, what our purpose is, what we aim to deliver. I think the best way to kind of explain this is essentially myself and a lot of our team members. We were in similar positions to yourself in terms of we were at university looking to apply for graduate jobs, and we were kind of looking for some guidance from some of our peers, some of our senior people. And we kind of have conversations with theirs, and they essentially provide that support in terms of whether that's looking at our CVs, giving us some information, just general advice, tips on the assessment center, tips on the application process. And we've really benefited from that guidance from our senior peers. And ultimately, we want to kind of share that experience back with you guys. So you guys are, where our team is now 3-4 years post-university, all in professional jobs, and we've kind of really been through the process, and we want to share our experiences to really help you guys achieve and ascertain those top jobs. So that's kind of a high level overview of what Grad Gurus is about. I'll get onto the actual how we go about that in terms of what we offer tangibly in order to support that towards the end of the webinar. But that's kind of an overview of what exactly we do. And the purpose of this seminar is obviously with investment banking. So we're joined today by our two colleagues, Zafar and Zafar, who both have experience working in investment banks, and they kind of talk us through their experiences. Moving on, just to kind of introduce the team. So we have quite a diverse and wide-ranging team in the sense that a couple of us have the traditional route in terms of working at Big Four. So myself and Ahmed Astawani, we've trained at EY, KPMG. We're currently still working in external audit. Similarly, we have Ali Ahmed, who's the founder of Grad Gurus. He trained at EY, now is currently working at JP Morgan internal audit. And then we have our other two tech spontaneous guys. Jama is more related to software engineering. He did a placement year working at ExxonMobil. And we have our consultancy marketing guy, Ikia. So quite a spectrum of different careers, spectrum of different professionals. We're kind of trying to build a portfolio to kind of tailor our skill set to kind of utilize and benefit for the wider market in terms of you guys. So that's quite a high level overview of the team. So just to get into the actual webinar, I'll introduce our first speaker, which is Zafar. So Zafar is an investment banking analyst. He works at Barclays. He's also had experience working at a Bulger marketing firms. So he's also studied at the University of Manchester. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Zen. Zen, if you don't mind just putting your camera on so we can see your face.
Listen, thank you, Ibrah, for the introduction, and thank you to the team at Grad Gurus for having me on. And I guess thank you to everyone who's joined. I hope that this is a useful event for everyone. I don't want to sort of be spending too much time talking about myself and talking sort of at you guys, because it's going to get sort of very boring very quickly. So I want to make it more of an interaction thing. So please do post any questions that you have, and sort of I want to spend more time in the Q&A, because I think it'd be just more useful for everyone involved, rather than me just sort of giving you guys sort of all the information that you might not even need. But I will start with a bit of introduction. So I studied, as Ibrah mentioned, at the University of Manchester. I just graduated in the summer. I studied politics, philosophy, economics, and I guess, I mean, I didn't really study anything related to investment banking, right? I studied economics, I studied some sort of mathematics, some econometrics courses, but I didn't really learn anything that I do right now, anything in my job. I didn't learn it at the university. Right. So I guess that's like the first thing for everyone who's attending. It doesn't really matter what you study. In my grad group, there's people that have studied languages, there's people that have studied sort of mathematics, more sort of finance, econ courses, but you have people that have studied chemical engineering. You have some people that have studied medicine. You have some people that have studied sort of all different types of courses. So that's one thing that I've definitely learned, is that your degree doesn't really matter to get into the industry. In my first year, I guess I applied to a lot of spring roles like every other first year, not knowing what to do, not knowing sort of how to really have a good application. And unsurprisingly, I didn't really get any spring interviews even, actually, let alone sort of an offer. But then second year, I worked on my CV a lot more, right? So I sort of Googled around, I started speaking to a lot of people, started understanding what is it that I need to get into the industry, spent a lot more time on my application. And after many interviews and many sort of applications, I managed to get an internship at an investment bank within sales and trading. So that was in my second year. That was also the same bank that I'm working at now. But like I said, in the sales and trading division. And then that was for 9 weeks over the summer, where I interned on the corporate FX desk, as well as electronic equities. And that was sort of across both sales trading, across different teams. I guess I can talk a little bit about that experience. working on the trading floor is quite different to working in IBD where I am now. The environment is very, very different. Trading floor is sort of very noisy and very sort of, there's a bit of buzz of the trading floor there. And you have two main roles that people do. You have salespeople who sell the products to a range of different clients. And these clients can be sort of hedge funds, asset management firms, pension funds, corporates even. And then you have traders who essentially make markets. So, I mean, I will touch more on sort of what investment banks do in the next section, but essentially that's where I worked. And my second sort of rotation that I mentioned was in electronic equities. And I'll spend a bit more time talking about both of those desks a little bit later. During my internship, I think I realized that while that experience was really, really good, and I've certainly enjoyed it a lot, I wanted maybe something more where I can really understand client goals. I can understand what a firm wants to do, maybe sit with the CEO or the CFO of the company, look at their ambitions. What do they really want to achieve in the next sort of 5 years? And then add value to that in some way. So suppose that, a CEO might have an ambition that, listen, I have a company that's really sort of dominating the market in the UK, but I want to expand overseas. And, I want to particularly enter into these particular markets, and he needs a way to do it. So as an investment banker, you can sit with the CEO and say, okay, listen, you need to raise an X amount of money in order to be able to expand. So what's the best way of raising those funds? And then you help them raise those funds, right? Other ways could be, so you might sit with them and see, listen, if you want to expand your presence in, say, South Africa, but you don't really know anything about the South African market, so it might be better for you to just maybe acquire some firms that are already working in South Africa and then expand your presence in South Africa through that. So as someone who might work in IBD, those are the kind of conversations you'll be having with clients. And that's what I really wanted. So essentially, I started networking with people in IBD, spent a lot of time going on coffees with a lot of different people, and was very lucky that they needed to hire someone in IBD. They had a bit of shortage, and luckily I got my grad offer there. And so after my third year at university, where I was part of the Mutis Finance Society, after that, I have now joined the IBD division, and I'm currently working in equity capital markets. So I want to sort of take a step back, and because there'll be sort of a range of people working on this webinar who sort of some of you guys might have like a lot of experience within the industry, i.e. you might have sort of a good understanding of what investment banks do. Others might be very, very new. So broadly speaking, if you look at the sort of financial industry as a whole, you can sort of split it into sell side and buy side. On sort of the buy side, think of it as people that have the money, but that need to spend the money somehow. So these could be, clients like hedge funds, these could be asset management firms, these could be pension funds. All of these sort of companies, I guess, have money, have invested capital that they want to allocate somewhere, right? They want to invest it somewhere and receive a return. And then on the other side, you have, firms like investment banks, or you could have other sort of research firms or commercial banking firms or advisory services. And these are firms that essentially are kind of like a supermarket in a way, right? These are the ones that are providing the services, that are providing those opportunities for those buy-side investors to then, allocate their capital somewhere. So the investment banks will be like on the other side, they'll be selling them the products and the services, and the buy sides will be the one that are paying for those products and those services. And then within an investment bank specifically, you can broadly break it down into two main sort of divisions: the public side of the investment bank and the private side of the investment bank. The public side of the investment bank is essentially where I did my internship. It's the sales and trading arm of an investment bank. Over here, you deal with only public information. They will not have any inside information. They won't have any confidential information. They will deal with everything that me and you or anyone else will have, like any of the information that we have from Google, from Bloomberg, from other news agencies, etc. And within sales and trading, I touched on this before, right? You have two main roles. You have the salesperson role and you have the trader role. And you also have like a third role, which is like a research role, i.e. research analyst who might write research reports on companies, who sort of broadly tend to sit within the sales and trading arm of the investment bank as well. Within sales and trading, you're broadly split up with more of sort of a macro and equities split. So you have like usually a floor where you have all these macro desks that will deal with products such as FX products. They might deal with credit products. They might deal with bonds, etc., etc. And then on the other hand, you have some more micro level, like division within sales and trading, which is such as like equities, and that will be split again across maybe looking at single equities, i.e. trading stocks for companies, or looking at maybe portfolios of companies. And then you can get into some more exotic products like maybe derivatives. You might have like a corporate derivatives desk. You might have a Delta One desk that only deals with Delta One exposure to companies. And if anyone is interested in any of these desks or divisions, I can again expand on it more in the Q&A, but I don't want to be talking at you guys in more detail if that's not something you're interested in. And then on the other side, so looking at the more private side, usually it's referred to as the IBD division of an investment bank. And that's split across, I mean, it depends on different banks, but generally, broadly speaking, you'll have a capital markets group. Capital markets group is essentially there to help clients raise money one way or the other, right? And that could be through equity capital markets, which is where I work, which is by investors selling equity in their company. And as a result, they're raising the funding, right? So a corporate might be, so a company might sort of, have sort of a valuation of maybe say $3 billion, and they might want to raise an extra $1 billion. It's usually quite hard to find one investor that's going to invest $1 billion in you. I mean, you could do, but it's very, very hard, right? And essentially, it's very hard to do that without selling complete control of your company to one investor. So a lot of times what the corporates will want to do is they want to sell it to a public market where there'll be thousands and thousands of different investors who will all sort of chip in with some money and get some shares in return for that money. And it's a win-win situation for both sides, because investors, like I said, will have money and they want to spend that money somewhere, right? And they want a return on it. And then corporates on the other side will need that money to, maybe they want to expand, maybe they want to pay for certain debts that they have, maybe they'll need it for accounting purposes. There could be a wide range of reasons why they might need that money. And essentially what they'll do is they'll ring up an investment bank, or vice versa. It's really the investment banks will approach them and say, listen, we know that you are looking to expand, or we know that you need some capital. So why don't we maybe sit down with some investors and talk about what sort of valuations they might be interested in, in terms of investing in your company. And that's where the equity capital markets group within an investment bank come through. And then on the other side, you'll have the debt capital markets as well. So maybe the corporate doesn't want to sell equity in the company. Maybe they just want to raise money through debt, right? They'll pay interest on that debt that they get, that they raise to investors, but in return they get to save that equity. They don't get to give away a portion of the company. That's where the debt capital markets will come in. So they will help those companies issue bonds publicly and raise money from that. And then you also have other groups such as M&A, which stands for mergers and acquisitions. I don't want to go into more detail because I know Zafar is going to talk into more detail, but broadly speaking, again, it's a group where if companies want to merge with each other or acquire another firm, then usually with the mergers and acquisition department that will sort of help you do that, but I'll leave that to Zafar. And then apart from that, you have other sort of coverage groups. These coverage groups could be covering a particular, say, a particular industry, i.e. you might have a healthcare group, you might have a, it could be anything. It could be a tech group, media, oftentimes technology, media, telecommunications is put together in one group. It could be natural resources. And these groups will essentially focus on every company within that industry, but deliver a wide range of products within that industry. So they wouldn't focus specifically on providing equity solutions or providing debt solutions or providing M&A solutions, but they will be experts within that industry. So they'll understand maybe sort of what sort of valuations companies trade at within that industry. They'll understand how investors feel about that particular industry. So every time an investment bank might do a deal with a corporate within that industry, the coverage team will be there to give their input from an industry perspective. And then you will have you'll have teams that will be covering a particular region. So if, for example, you might have a Spain coverage team. Now these people will, again, they'll be working across products, so they're not experts within a particular product, but they are experts within that particular region. So they'll understand how the main sort of regulation problems within that region. They'll understand how investors feel about that region. They'll understand how other similar companies are trading within that region, etc. So they'll be able to give their input in a particular deal from a regional perspective. That's how generally the teams within our IBD are split up.
Zain, if again, I could just quickly step in there. Thanks for that overview. That was really interesting. Just a couple of questions on some of the points that you raised there. Firstly, you mentioned obviously you're very new to investment banking. You joined the graduate scheme last year. So I just wanted to ask, if I'm in a position whereby I'm in my third year of university, I'm not entirely sure which role to go for, whether that's management accountancy, whether that's auditing, whether that's tax, or whether that's investment banking. Could you kind of give some guidance on how you chose that investment banking was the correct role for you, and what research you did there on?
No, that's a really good point, actually, because I was in a similar position. Like I said, because I started in sales and trading, which is completely different. It's on the public side of the investment bank to working on the private side of the investment bank. I guess the first thing would be that you don't really know if you're going to enjoy it or if it's going to suit your skill set until you're there. So my first piece of advice would be to just get any experience that you can within broadly that sort of similar industry or that firm. So if you think that you might be interested in investment bank, but you're not sure about what role you're interested in investment bank, just get some experience in working in any division within the investment bank. because once you're in the firm, you get to, you're not going to spend time just in your division. You're going to spend time across the bank, across the firm. You can go speak to people that work there. You can go shadow them. You can go talk to them about the experience and really be there to sit with them and look at the work that they're doing. And similarly, if you're not even sure if you want to go into investment banking, but you're thinking of the financial services industry as a whole, but you don't know where to go, just literally get any experience that you can. So if it's a big four that gives you experience within audit, within consulting, with anything, go there. Spend, maybe if it's like a 2 weeks experience, 4 weeks experience, 6 weeks experience, spend time there. But then while you're there at the firm, reach out to people around the firm and literally just say, listen, I'm interning at the firm, but I'm sort of really exploring my career opportunities and really trying to understand what suits me best and what I'd be really interested in. And I was wondering if I could just spend a bit of time with you and to really understand what you do. That would be the best way of really learning about what you want to, what might be suited to you. Until then, it's very, very hard. For me, I've Googled the hell out of the industry, right? I literally picked up and read anything that I could find on the internet. And I pretty much went to every single event that I could. Every single time an investment bank would come to my university, I would go and speak to the people that work there and try and understand what to do. And I mean, I didn't get it right the first time, right? So I clearly thought I wanted to go into sales and trading. I went an intern there, but then I realized, listen, this is really, really good. I enjoy it, but maybe something else, maybe IBD might be more suited to me, because maybe that's something that I'd be looking for. Instead of trading, it's like quick trading. It's like a client calls you up, they're like, hey, listen, I want to do X, Y, Z trade. And you're like, okay, let me execute that for you. Or vice versa, you might ring up the client and say, listen, I know you have positions in these particular assets, but I think, there's a particular interesting thing happening here. Why don't you do such and such trade? It might benefit you. Whereas on the IBD side, it was very different. It was, you sit with sort of the CFO, the CEO of a company, and then you look at more the strategic direction he wants to take the company. And you say, okay, listen, how can I help you get there? Maybe, you need to raise this amount of money, or maybe, these are sort of people that I can introduce you to, and maybe this is the services that we can provide to help you reach that 5-year target, the 10-year target, or it could be sort of the short-term targets, suppose they're, short of liquidity and they really need capital like ASAP. And you can be like, you can step in and you can be like, okay, listen, this is how I can help you get there. So it's just a case of literally trying to get any experience that you can and speaking to the people around the firm and trying to understand it that way. From Google, there's only so much that you can learn. You have to speak to the people that work in the industry, and you have to sort of go and shadow them and really learn about what they're doing. And I guess this sort of brings me to the third part. I don't know if I'm overrunning for time. So
no, if you just conclude on that last point, that'll be good. Then
because this just connects to like the next point I wanted to make. Well, just spend a minute on it. Is to say that please try and network with as many people as you can. That's one of the things that I really try to focus on at the start. Is that every time an investment bank would come to my university, especially where I got the job, they came to the university and I sort of started speaking to the HR people that work there. And again, I can expand on the Q&A in the Q&A about more into sort of how exactly to network. But the way I did it was to speak to the HR person, really try and show my interest in the firm. From there, I was lucky to be invited to an interview. Before I went to the interview, I reached out to as many people as I could around the bank and said, hey, listen, I have an interview coming up with the bank. Do you think I could maybe speak to you and learn a little bit more about what XYZ division does? And luckily for me, one of the directors that interviewed me knew me from beforehand, because I spoke to someone in his team, and the person in the team told the director, hey, listen, this guy called Zain, he reached out to me and he's asking me a lot about FX. And this director, when he interviewed me, he was like, okay, yeah, I already know you because you spoke to XYZ person. So the key of sort of getting into the industry is to please network with anyone and everyone that you can. And like I said, if anyone's more interested in that, I can expand more in the Q&A, but I will end there in the interest of time.
Perfect. Thanks, Zain, for that. It was a really good overview. So our next speaker is Muhammad Zafar. Just a very quick overview. Similar to Zain, he also studied at the University of Manchester, but Muhammad Zafar had a couple of different roles. Firstly, starting in Accenture, then moving on to other strategy consultancy firms. And I'll pass you over to Muhammad Zafar, if I can again request you to put your camera on and unmute your mic and just give us an overview of what your experiences have been so far to date.
Thank you, Abrar. Thank you, Zain. Thank you to GradGurus. So yeah, my name is Mohammed Hafar, ex-Manchester Uni, born and bred in Manchester. I currently find myself in Beirut, Lebanon. That is where my parents are originally from. So I'm currently out here. I'll talk a little bit about why. I'd like to try and split up this section into two parts. So the first bit I really want to focus on, and I think hopefully should have some value. And then the second, we can go into a bit more detail about my M&A experience, specifically investment banking. So the first bit that I said, I really want to try and send across a message, which is something that I'm continuously myself trying to learn. And when I look back, I think would have benefited a lot from, which is this idea about, and it depends from what background you're coming from, right? If you have a psychology background or if you read a lot, you'll have heard of Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. So he's like a clinical psychologist researcher. And if you've read the book, and I do advise it to all of you, even just a summary, he talks about this idea of the reptilian brain and, the thinking side of the brain. I think that's really useful. If you go from like a religious background, and I assure you there's a link here. They talk about having a side of you which is always in hope, and then another side of you which is in fear or is always agitated. So for the context of this and investment banking, I really want you guys to think about this idea about process and then focus. So these are really two things that you always have to keep in check, in balance. And when we all do it unconsciously, but it's about trying to keep that balance and think about it and keep it in consideration. So what do I mean by process and what do I mean by focus? Process is what we're here talking about today, right? It's the process of how do I break into investment banking? And then focus is the actual, steps that you take, the things that you're doing, attending this call, networking, applying. But before we focus, we obviously have to have a process involved. So first of all, your process needs to be, well, what is it I want? So again, a lot of you said that you're just kind of getting your information. So is your process that you want to go into investment banking, or is the process that you want to have a good career after uni? Is your process that you want to learn a lot? Everybody has to have that own answer, and everybody will have their own, considerations, right? And nobody can answer that for you. You need to make that up yourself. What is it that you're going for? What's your process? Is your process to get investment banking? Is your process to get investment banking at a particular firm? You need to research that yourself, and we can advise it, but you really need to make that decision. Now, once you've decided that process, you can then go on to focus and start making those moves and steps. Now, I'd like to, obviously now I've set the scene, I'd like to actually show you this process and focus, balance, and imbalance sometimes from my own story. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen, and it's going to be a bit of a quick fix. So this is the first photo I'm going to show. For those of you guys who do know, this is Austin Powers, and he's showing Dandy Baby. It's something that means a lot to me. Why? Because when I first went to uni, you could say that I had that balance off. My process was, Goldman Sachs, bulge bracket, American Bank. That's it. That's what we're going for. And in my first year, I applied for a spring week. Interestingly enough, I applied for spring weeks all over the board, all over the firms, bulge bracket, middle market, boutiques. And the only investment banking offer for an interview I got actually was at Goldman Sachs. And funnily enough, that might be because I had such a focus at the time that I wanted to work at Goldman Sachs, and I got it. And I didn't get anywhere else. I got rejections from all over the board, which just shows you how random this process is and how sometimes it's not random. Sometimes if you do have that focus, you can get there. Now, why am I showing you this picture? Panelists will know this. They'll be laughing in the background. I had such a focus that when I attended my first interview with Goldman Sachs, I'd revise what is, discounted cash flow and what's WACC and what the recent deals that, Goldman Sachs had made, all of these technical details, which are really important, but I lost the feeling of the big picture. And what happened is I walked into the room and I got greeted by the guy, and I was so focused on what I was about to say and, the kind of all the questions that he might ask, that he asked me, "Oh, how are you doing today? How was your day?" And I kind of really randomly answered, "Oh, I'm doing dandy." And it was such a random response. And it threw me off really, actually, for the rest of the interview. And I ended up kind of messing it up. And, I learned a lot from that process because, and one thing that you all need to know today is that you are all really good enough to work at these banks and all these companies and be successful, whatever it is you want. And really kind of the only blocker is you and your thoughts and your feelings towards the process, right? So the process is something that you should trust. Once you've got the process in place, you should trust that process, and whatever comes from that process, trust it. for me, again, when I didn't get that, I kind of got shaken a little bit, and I didn't end up getting an investment banking internship in my first year. I got something else, which was really useful. I got something at Barclays, which then converted into a summer internship. But what I did anyway was I took a step back and I kind of thought, okay, well, what is it I want? What is it I want from this process? And I said, actually, you know what? It's not necessarily working at Goldman Sachs. That's just a title. For me, it's really about learning, and I'm really into entrepreneurship. So it was about trying to learn things that would perhaps make me one day a good entrepreneur. So with that, I kind of changed the process a bit. I said, no, what you're here for, or what you're doing, what you're aiming for is to try and gather the skills necessary in order to get to that final goal. Now, what that did, and part of this like process focus kind of balance, is when you have it in check, there's something else which opens up, which is creativity, right? If you're too focused on the task at hand and thinking about the minutia, you lose creativity. And you read too many like Wall Street Oasis articles or breaking into investment banking things. They tell you do 1, 2, 3, and you're just following a guide. And at that point, like I said, you lose the creativity element. On the flip side, if you don't have any focus, then it's just a dream. It's just something that exists in fairy tale land. So this is the balance. So one time that I did get that balance quite right, and from this, I think we can all take the value of networking. Zain mentioned it a lot. Really, really is valuable. It was my first year, and it was after the spring week season. It was January exams. And I remember I had like not turned up to an economics 101 lecture for the whole term. I couldn't be bothered. So I had the exam, and I was like, okay, what we're going to have to do, we're going to have to put in an all-nighter, check out the lecture slides, and just hope we can pass it. Now, lo and behold, that same evening, I don't know, I was randomly Googling something, or I was on LinkedIn, and I saw that a local firm in Manchester, a boutique called GP Bullhound, they had an event. They do it, I think actually they've got one coming up soon if you want to check it out. They do a technology predictions event every year. So anyway, and they were doing an event, and it was that same night, and it was in town. I lived a little bit outside of the city centre. So I thought, man, I managed to kind of email them and see if they've had slots. And they said, yeah, we do. I was like, okay, well, that's good, but I've got this exam. And I thought, oh, I'm going to have to drive into town. And this is where the second photo that I want to share comes into relevance. So it's not the exact parking display. I wasn't that keen, but this was the machine and the price that it took to win an investment banking internship. £4.60, I think that was the fee that I paid. I ended up deciding, you know what, screw it. I'll go to the event. I'll pay the £4.60 parking fee, and I'll attend, and then I'll worry about the revision later. So I attended this investment banking. In fact, the first thing that happened is I walked into the room. I was there a bit early. Obviously, setting first impressions right is a key thing, but you guys all should know that. So I attended there. I got there early once for my life, and I saw one of the analysts who works at GP Bullhound, and he was like, "Oh, is that Mohammed?" And I think he'd probably seen that I'd emailed. I was like, "Yeah, it's." He's like, "Okay, you're a student." I was like, "Yeah, that's me." And then the first thing he said to me, and it caught me so much by surprise, but it shows you when you trust in the process, things happen. He goes, "What do you think about doing an internship with us?" And I was like, "An internship? Well, that's it. No interview, no." Show me an income statement, dissect three financial statements. He just offered it to me right there and then. And it was just such a shock. But it really shows that how randomness can come out of nowhere. But if you've got something in place and you make those steps, right? When you've got the process, but then you focus in and say, okay, that's it. I know what I want to do it. And the right time came. And I was fortunate enough to be able to attend that session and that networking event. And then I got the interview. I even got the internship. And yeah, so I'll talk about the internship a little bit later. I ended up actually interning with them after uni finished, worked for about a year as an analyst. But after I did a little bit of internship work with them, I realized that actually investment banking wasn't specifically what I wanted. I thought it was really good. I learned a lot of things, but I wanted to try something else. And this is where consulting, I saw one of the Q&A questions was about consulting. And I mean, probably again, a lot of you will be thinking like consulting, banking, like, they're the ones thrown out, and for right reason. But I wanted to try consulting. So I kind of continued uni, finished first year, did my spring week at Barclays, like I said. Second year summer internship was at Barclays. I was in corporate banking. Really great for networking. Echo what Zain said. I didn't leave one guy in investment banking, even though I was like doing a corporate banking internship, left. What did I do? Some tips and tricks. Like I said, my Lebanese background, I really leveraged that. I ended up like working my way up. I remember like I reached out to like firstly a Lebanese guy who was interning, and then like he introduced me to like his Lebanese guy who was his associate, and then the associate eventually, I remember like it was like the penultimate day of the internship. Crazy, like funny story, but yeah, like ended up meeting with like the head of banking, EMEA, Lebanese dude called like Makram. Like yeah, I remember like running across the building, like arriving to his room like sweating. It was like literally it was a spontaneous spur of the moment. He had like 5 minutes. He was like, "Come over and let's chat." So yeah, like these are just like random stories, and I think the journey, the process is really, you're gonna get bored of me saying it, but it's really part of it. Like, you know, it's not about the goal, it's about the journey, what you learn and everything like that. Honestly, it's cliche, but it's true. So finished my second year summer internship, and it gets to grad time. I didn't have a grad role set up. I mean, I'd got the summer internship from Barclays, but I turned it down because I didn't want to continue with it. And at this point, I kind of took a step back. I reassessed, and it was just like, you know what, final year uni, I just want to make the most of it, do different events, meet different people. And this is the third photo that I want to show. So I was part of, or I wasn't part of it, but Consulting Society, they arranged like a case study competition. I applied to attend this competition between different universities where we all kind of do a case study, and you know, we come and you get a prize and whatever. So this is my group, and we eventually kind of won it. And the main takeaways from this, I think there are two. Number one is that, you know, kind of came up with three guys I didn't know from uni, I'd never met before, but you know, they were all at Manchester. And we came across again at different universities. It was Warwick, UCL, Cambridge, I think. And we basically bashed it out for like one day. We had one day to prepare for this case study and present it the next day to like consulting, employees, like people from Accenture, people from Deloitte at the time. I can't remember who else. And it was a really great experience. Why? Because that was probably, other than my summer internship, which actually in a way can sometimes be a little bit like you're in a bubble, because, you know, obviously you're kind of an intern group. This was actually probably the first time that gave me the real understanding of what it's like to work at a company, because it was like a deadline. You kind of have people you're working with, and then you've got to deliver. That's the key thing. As an intern, sometimes you're not really expected to deliver. You're kind of there to learn. But again, depends what you're doing in the internship. So yeah, we ended up winning. We presented, and I remember actually one of the Accenture people who was the judge, she said this was as good as some of the work that we do. And that was the first time that actually proved to me that really you're good enough, like where you are right now at this university and all the things you're going to learn on the way, you're good enough to do the job that a grad does. And even though it might not seem that way, and you know, you might kind of question yourself and question your skills and question your background, at the end of the day, you've got the smarts, and you've probably got the people skills and ability to capture information, process it, and share it that you might not think you have. And it was actually off the back of that feedback from the Accenture colleague that I thought, well, let me check out Accenture. And, you know, that's a whole other story. I ended up applying to Accenture again, randomly, got it. It felt really smooth, wasn't stressed. At this point, I was kind of like just going with the flow. So yeah, that's the end of my first section. And that's, again, like I said, the real thing I want to put across. Just have that process in place, have that goal you have. When the time comes to focus, but then trust in the process, the bad and the good that comes from it. And there's no real bad really, because one door closes, another opens, you learn something, you use it here, and you get there eventually. Now I went on to the investment banking, like breaking into investment banking. So I told you about the networking. I told you about how randomly I ended up then getting to work for a year after graduating at GP Bullhound. So GP Bullhound are a boutique, so a little bit different maybe from a bulge bracket. Same concept, right? In the sense that Zain did a really great job of explaining to you the different strands of IBD, of like, buy side, sell side. But really, I like to think about it in terms of, especially at a boutique, because you're a small team. That's the main difference, right? A boutique be a smaller team, mainly focused on either a segment. So we were like tech focused at GP, or transaction size. So like dealing with less than 100 mil or over 100 mil, whether that's a fundraise that they're trying to raise 100 mil or sell a company or buy a company for 100 mil, whatever it is, right? That's what we mean when we say transaction size. So yeah, at a boutique or any IBD team, really, you have like your MD, the managing director, and you got to really think about him as like a partner in the firm. Similar to a consulting firm, there'll be partners. An MD is really almost like a partner. That is to say, he's there to generate money, generate business, or generate clients for the business. So his number one priority is how's his pipeline of business coming along. That's how IBD works. And that's why there's hours, the tough hours that always people talk about. That's why they get tough, because you have a pipeline that you try and build of deals, right? Because each company's in a different spot at a different part of the year. You might speak to one company who are looking to sell and that's it, they've made their mind up. Another company, well, maybe they're thinking about selling in 3 years, but actually the next 6 months, they want to raise some finance. So the MD, he's really all about managing those relationships, managing that pipeline of deals, and then it flows down from there. So you've got like, let's say the vice president. The vice president will be involved very close with the MD, maybe like more intricate with the technical side of the project, right? So he'll maybe accompany the MD to like a meeting. And the good thing at a boutique is that as an analyst, sometimes you attend those meetings just because, everyone's close. I mean, it'd be interesting to hear Zain, maybe in the QA, like whether you've been able to get to those meetings too, but that was my experience at the boutique anyway. And then, in essence, depending on what the client wants, it gets passed down to the associate. They'll devise like a plan of action, right? So it'll be like, okay, you want to raise money in 6 months' time. So the way we'll do it is for the first 2 months, we'll work on, positioning the company in the right way. What does that mean? It means that we'll start to tell the story the way that investors want to hear it. So like, I remember one time, like we had like a client who was they made like phones or like telecommunication networks for mission critical services. So that's like airports, army, stuff like that, right? Probably not that interesting or exciting, but what they did is they tried to flip the company in a way that it made it sound more like a tech company. And then that meant that they could command a higher valuation. So it's all about crafting stories. And that's what these companies are good at doing, crafting stories, selling the message, knowing the right people to get that message and story across to, so that they can get the deal done and dusted and get the right deal for their clients and add value is what it's really all about. As an analyst, you'll just support that process or whichever way possible. Like I said, crafting a deal or telling a story, whether it's designing a pitch, doing this actual presentation, or doing the numbers to make the right story possible. So that's really what I can share. I mean, Zain did a great job of explaining IBD. I'd be happy to take questions if there are ones in more detail. But guys, you are all good enough, and I'll hand off to Ibra to continue.
Thanks for that, Mohammed. That was some really interesting stories, some really good life lessons as well in general. So as mentioned, the last section will be on the Q&A section. And we've already got a couple more questions coming through. So please keep posting them as we come along. Any questions, don't worry if you think a question is stupid. There is an anonymous feature where you could send in a question which you don't think is actually sounds very smart. So don't worry about anything like that. We will also, in the Q&A section, we'll also have Ahmed Astawani. As mentioned, he's part of the team at GradGurus. And just a very quick high-level overview. Ahmed is the assistant manager at KPMG in external audit. So not necessarily directly linked with investment banking, but he'll be able to kind of bring to life some of these skill sets, some of the competencies is quite a common word that is shared across the application process, which are definitely relevant to you nevertheless. So if I can request all our panelists, Zain, Ahmed and Mohammed, to turn on the cameras, and we'll dive straight into the Q&A section. I'll actually want to kick off with the Q&A section with a question for myself. So I guess this question is to you, Mohammed. When it comes to your actual making applications, or imagine I'm a third-year student looking to make my applications, And ultimately, despite what you said, I think ultimately everyone still wants to go for the big corporate banks in terms of Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan. But should I be strategic in my applications, in the sense, should I work myself up? So applying at the boutique firms, then apply to the mid-tier firms, and then go for the big bulge banks, in the sense that I could get experience at the boutique firms in terms of application process, interview prep, and then when it comes to the bigger applications, I've already had that experience in place. So when my application goes through, it counts a lot more, if that makes sense.
I think, yeah, that's sensible. But at the same time, like the way that the numbers are, in the sense that how many places are compared to the amount of applicants, sometimes it just makes sense to kind of spread it, and whatever hits. But obviously always, yeah, if you can give quality to every application, whether that's through the networking, so that you can tailor your cover letter in the right way, or get in front of the right people, definitely there's value in doing that.
Perfect, thanks. And then just a question to you. Throughout your introduction, you mentioned how the importance of networking is. So if I'm an undergraduate in my second, third year university, how do I kind of build a network there? It's quite difficult because a lot of my peers will just be university students. How do I kind of get access to people who are employed for these companies and really build a network and a connection with these type of people? Should I be using platforms like LinkedIn, even though I won't have, as a university student, I'll have minimum profile on LinkedIn?
No, I mean, first is it's a really good question. It's a very important question as well. And just to go for the point about profile on LinkedIn, that doesn't really matter, right? As long as you've got a profile picture, you've got sort of a decent bio, and you've got sort of a part of your CV on your LinkedIn, no one's going to look at anything else. So you don't need your LinkedIn profile to be extraordinary with all these sort of connections and all that sort of stuff. None of that's important. But going about sort of how you network as a university student, in the UK, the culture is a bit different to in America. In America, you get jobs a lot easier based on the networking you've done with the senior people that work at the firm, i.e. the people at the firm have a lot more flexibility in terms of recommending people to sort of get interviews. In the UK, from what I've seen and what I've experienced, that flexibility is reduced until someone gets to an interview stage. So before you have an interview at a firm, I would focus networking more at actual events. So if an investment bank comes down to university, you should absolutely be at the event. And at that event, obviously you want to speak to everyone who works in the business, right? Those are the people that you want to really learn from. But also don't forget the HR. Go talk to the HR and go talk to them. Have some questions prepared. Ask them about the process. Ask them about, okay, so for example, right, the way I did it was when sort of my bank came down to my university, I obviously spoke to everyone at the firm. I spoke to different people in different divisions. But then at the end, I went to the sort of the head of HR who was there, who was leading the event. And I was like, listen, hey, I did my video interview, but I never heard back from it. And I'm, very, very keen on joining your firm. And I'm very, very keen in XYZ divisions. And I'm, I have past experience in XYZ, but I'm really, really interested in this. And I really want to do this. I'm very, very keen about it. But I'm just, I want to know how does the process run? How long should I wait till I hear back? Because I'm a little bit concerned. So he was like, why don't you email me afterwards? And after the event, I was like, yeah, great to see you at the event. But I was wondering, if you could provide me an update as to where my application is. And he happened to send an email to the rest of the HR team. So obviously he's the head of the team. He's not going to look at you directly, but he sent an email to other people who then sent emails to other people. And essentially the person that replied to me, and I could see the sort of full email chain back starting from that person, from the HR guy that I met, was like, can you please look into this kind of email? And then from there, they were like to someone else at HR was like, okay, this kind of email, where's the application process at, and all that stuff. And this person said that you should hear back soon. And then I heard back soon, and I went to the next stage. And after the next stage, again, didn't hear back anything. So then I went back to the person that I met that already sort of built a bit of connection with him. He'd seen my face, he'd know who I am. And I was like, listen, I'm just wondering if I can, I'm just wondering if how where my process is up to when I should expect to hear back. And again, it was the same thing. He sent an email to people, and I saw the full chain coming back. So the point is that reach out to HR, and because it will help you stand out in the process, because it'll be a pile of thousands of sort of applications. So you need anything that can sort of help you stand out. And the second way, once you get the interview, then reach out to people at the firm on LinkedIn. Message them on LinkedIn, say, hey, listen, I have an interview coming at your firm. I was wondering if I can learn a little bit more. Don't approach you from the perspective of, I'm really interested in a job. I want to get a job. And, can you kind of help me get a job? Approach you more from the perspective, I really want to learn about what you do. Because at the end of the day, people that work at these firms, especially the senior people, love talking about themselves, right? They absolutely love giving you their life story and how they ended up getting the success that they have. Right, so you want to reach out to them and from that perspective and be like, hey, how did you get to where you are? I just want to learn about your career. I want to get some tips from you about your career, about your firm, about your business, what you do day to day. And that's the way you should approach that process once you have the interview, because that will actually help you in your interview. When you actually interview, make sure to name drop, but do it subtly. Don't make it sort of too obvious, but subtly be like, I spoke to XYZ person at your firm, and he talked about the culture being like this, and that really attracted me. And that's going to make you really stand out.
Okay, thanks for that, Zain. Just conscious of time, we did say the webinar will end at 2 o'clock, but we have quite a lot of questions to go through, and this is really the key benefit of this webinar. So we're going to carry on after 2 o'clock, so by all means, please stay tuned in. Ahmed, a question for you. So Tariq Aziz has put in the Q&A, what is a great way to prepare for A, psychometric tests, and B, the video interviews?
I think with psychometric testing, the key is obviously practice. Psychometric testing is designed to test your ability to work under pressure. So for example, if you take a maths test or a logic reasoning test, and I'm interested to see what Zain or Mohammed would say, you would be able to answer all of those questions given unlimited time. So a common question in an investment bank, for example, would be, what's 31 times 31? The idea behind that question would be, if you had an unlimited amount of time or a calculator, you'd be able to answer that question. They're trying to put you off, throw you off tin, and trying to really see, can this person do this under pressure? Because I mean, all of your work that you're going to be doing is deadline driven. So you'll be able to answer all the psychometric test questions with an unlimited amount of time. You need to practice doing those questions under pressure. So just like anything, it just takes a lot of practice. There's a lot of websites online which give you those practice questions, but the aim should be, I'm going to get to the end of these questions. If there's 15 maths questions, 15 logic reasoning, 15 English, whatever the questions are, I'm going to finish them as quickly as possible. Similar to when I have a deadline in work, I'm going to hit that deadline, and I'm going to just try and hit it as best as possible, as opposed to we're trying to test how intelligent you are. Because if you really break down those questions, if you're at a reasonable red brick university, I'd be very shocked, like I said, with unlimited time, if you weren't able to sort of answer those questions. In terms of video interviews, as you can tell, we're all on screen right now, and it can sort of be a little bit awkward in terms of how you look on screen, how you come across when you're speaking. I think the best thing would be if you record yourself on like an iPhone video, get somebody to record you themselves, and then just watch that video over. How do you come across, how much of your body's in the video, your face, how you come across speaking. A lot of people have a very quiet voice when they're speaking, maybe a too loud of a voice. A video interview is the same as a normal interview, but unfortunately you're going to come across slightly differently. So you might need to raise your voice, lower your voice, like I said, compared to a normal interview. I think that's a real key, because often when you're doing a video interview, a question will come up on screen. You'll have 2 minutes to answer. It can be it can just be a little bit strange not having somebody in front of you. So again, practice makes perfect, but also, think about how you come across, and you may need to slightly adjust from what you do in a normal interview. I mean, those are sort of a brief answers.
Just one more thing on that. Look at the camera when you're doing the video interview, because that was something that I struggled with a lot, and I could not get used to it until I had to practice it myself many times. I only noticed it when I watched myself back on my own videos, and I realized that I was looking everywhere but at the camera, because it's very natural to look at the screen. It's very natural to look around, you look above you, but not at the camera, because there's no one responding back to you. So please practice looking directly into the camera. And then when you're doing your video interviews, again, look into the camera, because the person that's going to be seeing you is going to feel like you're making an eye contact if you're looking at the camera. Thanks
for that, Zain. Ahmed. Mohammed, a question for you. When we make applications, would you suggest sending out a large amount, i.e. applying to 30, 40 companies, or just focus on a select few 10 to 20 companies?
I think it's similar to the one that we just discussed. So, I mean, I guess because of just the number of places per applicant, really just send it as wide as possible. But yeah, I saw somebody else ask about kind of the whole thing now with Corona. I think, you're in the same boat as everybody else. Everybody's going to be clambering their way. And this is where I talk about the creativity element, right? You just got to be putting your net wide, asking friends of friends, this guy who knows that guy. And in traditional ways, that's the name of the game in this area. Everything, the numbers, the amount of people going to uni, the amount of people going for the same jobs, it's very competitive. So as out there and as creative as you can be in your approach, the better, I'd say.
Yeah, I just quickly add on to that, Mohammed. When you apply to Goldman Sachs, when you apply to JP Morgan, the amount of preparation that you need to do is really quite phenomenal. You know, you need to be putting in, you know, whatever, let's say you think to yourself, I need to put in 6 hours into this application, multiply it by 3 or 4. That's probably how much time you should be putting in with the amount of research that you're doing. If you listen to what Zain was saying, if you're applying every single sell side, buy side, capital markets, FX, market making, those are all terms which need to flow off your tongue, and you need to know them better than the guy doing the interview. If you're applying to 20, 30 companies, either you need to be dedicated enough to give, you know, 10 hours to each of those interviews, or if you don't have that time, well, I mean, or that dedication, you should probably question whether you want to work in an investment bank, because you're going to be working, you know, 16 hours per day. I think that's probably why we've all got, you know, sort of bags under our eyes at this point, after only sort of 2-3 years in the industry. But you really need to be, because, you know, you're going to have people who are also putting in 6 to 10 hours in an application. So if you're sort of applying to Goldman Sachs and giving it half an hour, doing the maths test, not really preparing for the interview. So I think probably maybe a midway solution would be applying to, you know, 3 or 4 bulge bracket firms, 3 or 4 boutique firms, 3 or 4 mid-tier firms, putting in, I would say, and maybe I'm exaggerating slightly, but maybe putting in 15 to 20 hours per application. At that point, I would be surprised if you don't get at least 1 or 2 offers. But the putting in 15 minutes into an application at JP Morgan, just compare yourself to the Oxford graduate with a first-class degree in PPE, who knows, you know, the jargon better than Zain knows it there. You're just not going to get anywhere. So you really need to put in, you know, a huge amount of time into each application. And this process of, I'm going to chuck my CV into, you know, 60 investment banks post, it's just not going to get anywhere really.
Thanks for that. Zain, coming back to you, one of the questions that's been posted by Rishi, in the current environment, due to the lack of career fairs and networking events in the COVID environment, how would you recommend networking in this unique environment?
Listen, reach out to people on LinkedIn. That's the first thing. I mean, there's also webinars online. All the banks are doing, and my firm's doing webinars as well. So go to those webinars, but if you want to make it more personal, reach out to people on LinkedIn and target the people that you, firstly, like, be brave, right? What do you lose from reaching out to someone? Like, they could be senior, they could be junior. The max they'll do is ignore you. That's it. No one's going to look at you if you're reaching out to them in a correct and a sort of polite manner. It's never going to be a disadvantage to you in any way, right? So you don't lose anything, but there's a lot to gain. You could learn a lot about the firm. You could maybe get in, or you could get on really well, and then he could introduce you to someone else, etc., etc. So be brave and reach out to those people. But secondly, also target the people that you reach out to. So maybe look for people that you have something in common, right? So, and Mohammed Zafar touched on this before as well, but start with people that are alumni from your university, because straight away those people will you know, be a bit more inclined to help you, right? I mean, you have like a panel at GradGurus as well. So if one of you guys is, for example, applying to like one of the firms that the panel is working at, or you know, maybe reach out to those guys, attend events like the ones GradGurus sets up, because chances are you're going to, you know, hear a lot of speakers at these events, and then, you know, you can reach out to them afterwards. You can ask questions at those events, and you can sort of try and network your way and build a relationship with the speakers at those events, right? These are all good places to do it. But also try and find, like I was saying before, like try and find some sort of commonality with the person that you're reaching out to. It could be that you're from the same city, from the same like ethnic background. It could be that, you know, you study the same degree. It could be that you're at the same university, because those people will always be a bit more inclined to help you out because they'll feel some sort of a personal connection. But be polite when you reach out to people, and make sure you reach out to them in the right way. So something that I noticed was, like, throughout sort of the years of networking, is at the start, like, not many people would respond, but towards the end, a lot more people started responding, and that was because my process of approaching people improved a lot. And the key thing there is to be polite, but don't be over the top polite as well. So don't go, oh, it would be absolutely amazing and fantastic if I could get 5 minutes of your time and we could perhaps go for coffee at a time. Don't go over the top with that. Just be very polite. Be like, hey, listen, I know you're busy, but it would be great if we could catch coffee sometime. Or, you know, it'd be great if I could do a quick phone call with you, just because I want to learn more about the industry. Something like that, something short and snappy, always works better than going over the top. And at the same time, you don't want to be not polite at all without any please and thank yous, and just be like, hey, you got some time, let's, you know, grab a coffee. Find a balance in there. Be polite, but not overly polite.
Yes, I'll very, very quickly add on to what Zain said, which is everyone who's working in an investment bank right now has at one point been in your position and has probably been helped out. And number two, it's sort of natural to want to give back in a certain way. believe it or not, in the same way that you're as a sort of a mentee looking for a mentor to help you out, in the same way, you know, for whatever reason, you know, people like to sort of help and give back. But people, you know, for example, like in Zane's position, maybe, for example, working 16-hour days, he might not have the time to post on Facebook, I'm willing to help anybody who messages me. But if anybody messages him, he's unlikely, or myself or anybody else, to turn them back. I don't know anyone who I work with, and I'm surprised, I'm sure Zane will say the same thing, who, if you send him a message, will turn you back. But often, you know, you can think these people are too busy, these people don't have any time for me, they're going to find it a bit weird. Actually, it's the opposite. People are waiting to sort of help you out. So that you should sort of bear that in mind, that actually I'm doing them a benefit just like they're doing me a benefit.
Just sticking with you, Ahmed, we've got a question from a college student, Amir. She's asked a question: what, as a current A-level student, do you recommend doing to gain an advantage at this stage?
I saw that question actually. I would get as high A-level grades as possible. I mean, if you can get 100 UMS in your maths exams, your English, whatever. I'll give you a quick example to show you how important this is. There's I mean, I don't know, probably the panelists know that there's one of my friends, Ali Qasim, works at Rothschild Bank. And I think 40 people applied for the role, and they don't take people out of university. It's sort of invite only. And it was because in his chartered accounting exam, he got the highest mark in the world. Now, as an investment banker, you don't, for example, necessarily do a qualification, I don't think. But unfortunately, there's so many commonalities between students. It's very difficult to differentiate. Number one, if you get such high level grades, you're more likely to get into Oxford, Cambridge, LSE, which is going to give you a major advantage. So again, another thing I would say is to make sure that you get into a top university. I went to University of Manchester. I'm not saying anything against the university itself, but obviously Oxford, Cambridge, LSE make up, you know, quite a large proportion of investment banking analysts, MDs. There's going to be, again, Zane was talking about that affinity between the people doing the interview and the people who are being interviewed. So if the MDs have gone to Oxford, Cambridge, they're going to naturally look to those people. So again, maximize your A-level grades, the networking you can do when you're in university, even the research into, again, you know, the jargon, what is sell side, buy side, what is all these things Zane was talking about. You can do that in university. You need to maximize your A-level grades. Really try and get into Oxbridge, into any course, or LSE if possible, particularly if you want to work for an investment bank. And once you've got through that period, and once you're in university, you know, again, if you're in Oxford, people are going to be coming to you and saying, we're Barclays, we're JP Morgan, we want you to work for us. Whereas if you go into like a red brick uni, like University of Manchester, you're going to have to do that extra legwork. I really can't, you know, sort of state enough how important it is to get not just A's or A stars in your A levels, but 100% in certain exams, and that's really going to catch you in good stead.
Yeah. Moving on to you, Mohammed, we've got a question from Eleonora, and she's asked, she's a first-year student at Manchester University, and her question is, at what stage should she be applying for internships, placements? I know you mentioned you applied for a couple of spring internships yourself.
I'd say that, what were we, November? It's probably too late to spring weeks. So I'd say what you should be doing as a first year is trying to learn as much as you can. If there are any cool companies, like even small ones, that in your local area that you're interested in, perhaps reach out to them, see what you can get. Any type of experience at your stage is good. So yeah.
Thanks for that, Mohammed. Zain, a question from you coming from Mahdi. How do you make yourself stand out in the application process in your CV and cover letter to boost your chances of an interview?
Yeah, it's a good question. And that's something that's very, very important. You need to have at least one thing on your CV that really stands out against other people. And I've seen all sorts of stuff, right? There's people who've raised X amount of money for charity. And I'm talking like a good sum, right? So like maybe they might have raised like £10,000 for charity for a particular cause that they're really, really interested in. And they're able to sort of really put it out there on CV, right? And it shows that you have something about you that's more than just any other person on the street. I've seen people who've set up businesses and they've reached certain very, very impressive targets. I've seen other people that have maybe coded some apps and therefore, again, like it showed that they're, you know, they have some sort of talent in them. But also like it could be like some sort of sports events. I suppose you're first in the UK or first in like your region and your county for badminton, or, you know, a particular type of sport that you might be. It could be the experiences that you've had. So like I know people that were like, you know, that someone that I know won like a competition in Latin ballroom dancing. And, you know, that was like one of the key things that the interviewer would always talk to him about. Every time they look at his CV, they'd be like, Latin ballroom dancing. Okay, talk to me about that. Talk to me about that experience. There's people that like gone to China and learned Kung Fu, for example, and they put on your CV, and then interviews kind of like tend to ask you questions on those sort of experiences. So have something a little bit different. It could be a business, it could be like some sort of experience that you've had, it could be an award that you've won, it could be the amount of money that you raised for charity, it could be anything, but have that sort of experience on your CV for sure.
Thanks for that, Zain. Just for the remainder of the attendees, Mohammed has to drop off. So before you just drop off, thank you on behalf of GradGurus for your time spent today, and appreciate you joining our webinar. You definitely shared a lot of insight and a lot of wisdom from that perspective. Coming back to you, Ahmed, I've got a question in relation to the impact of COVID on the industry. So given that COVID has a massive impact on the industry in general, what tips would you give for people who are applying for internships? What insights would you give and practical tips for the interview, such as how you dress, how you approach the interview?
I mean, on a first note, I mean, surely you should see that as an opportunity. I mean, I'm happy to hear Zain's view on this, but surely an interview question is now going to say to you, what's the impact of COVID on the investment banking industry? How has it affected deals? I work currently with an investment bank from an audit perspective. They've had a very, very solid 2020. They've done, I think they did 70 deals last year, M&A deals. They did 60 this year. So what does that sort of say about the impact of COVID on M&A? It's not, I mean, I don't know from the sort of large investment banks how it's impacted them, but from a boutique side, they've done a large number of deals. Private equity is still very keen on doing deals. I think probably April and May this year, there was a sort of a drop off. Zain is still, probably like myself, working extra hard, probably even harder than before. The investment banks have simply taken their teams and people are working from home. Business is still running at large. It's a bit, I mean, not to get too technical, but from an investor's perspective, investment in equity is going to be more risky. And so your sort of cost of equity is going to increase in COVID. At the same time, banks are going to lend money at a lower interest rate. So the cost of capital for firms is sort of staying reasonably similar, which is why investment should theoretically stay at a level rate. And again, from a technical standpoint, that's something that you should try and understand and really speak about in an interview. So again, from an M&A side, I know there's not been much of an impact. I'll leave it to Zain to discuss the impact on, say, the sales and trading side. In terms of foreign tips for an interview, when you work in an investment bank, everything is about how you come across. The way that you speak, the way that you dress is extremely important, which is why, for example, pre-1999, if you were a woman working in an investment bank, I don't even think you were allowed to wear trousers. I think you had to wear a skirt and heels, and that's only changed recently. So of course, it's majorly important to work on your personal image. Communication is also very key. You're going to be speaking on the phone with clients. This is why some of the psychometric testing focus on your English language skills. A lot of your interviews are going to be video interviews because of COVID. So again, coming back to what we were saying before, I'd really practice looking at the camera when you're speaking, practicing your video interview skills. How it's been explained to me in terms of recruitment is that recruitment is the same. I mean, COVID has obviously impacted the number of people that are being recruited because firms have been slightly worried about the impact of COVID on their business. That is now being reversed, i.e. we're slowly recovering from COVID. The investment banks, the other large firms are beginning to recruit the same number of people they recruited before. So you shouldn't really sort of say, COVID environment, I'm at a disadvantage in terms of there's less places. What I would say is that the nature of the application is going to be different, video interviews rather than in-person interviews. I'll sort of pass on to Zain to add any further points, maybe from particularly on investment banking side.
Yeah, no, I think it's a very good question. It's worth spending a bit of time on because COVID impact on investment banking has been very, very, very interesting, right? The key thing to think about is, firstly, it's been a record year for investment banks. It's been an absolute record year. It's been a record year for debt issuances. It's been a record year for equity issuances. And the key thing being is that interest rates are very, very low at the moment, right? Central banks around the world are cutting interest rates around the world, right? And we've seen in the UK, we're negative rates in Europe. The Fed in the US turned their policy completely from being very hawkish to now, cutting interest rates in a row. So what that essentially means is right now, for investors, it's very, very cheap to borrow money and spend that money, invest that money. So as a result, equity capital markets are, there's huge investor demand for these products, huge investor demands. And as a result, they're willing to pay a bit more to companies that are issuing these equities, these convertible bonds. So you've seen a crazy amount of demand in the industry, and there's a bit of a supply-demand imbalance here, right? Where there's so much demand, but not enough supply. So at the moment, there's just so much attractiveness for issuers to issue these equity products into the market, especially when you look at like hybrid products like convertible bonds, because they provide sort of a level of safety net at the bottom, because it's like a bond that converts into equity. They provide some sort of safety level at the bottom, but then at the same time, you have a lot of upside in the product. And these products are so attractive for investors right now, and therefore they're very attractive for issuers right now because they're receiving really good sort of amount of money for the equity. And then don't forget that when COVID hit, there was a big sort of liquidity crisis for corporates around the world. All of a sudden, these corporates were looking really wide. They were like, okay, we have X amount of money in the bank, but we don't know what the future looks like, and we don't know how long we can hold this for, and therefore we really need to raise money, and we need to raise it fast, and we need to have it in the bank sitting there. I mean, we were heading for a massive crisis. Don't forget, in March we had no idea where we were going to go. Our businesses were shutting down. We were going into lockdowns, and these companies were panicking. So, they had to really reach out into the debt capital markets and raise as much funding as they can to have that liquidity buffer in their banks in order to support them through the next couple of months. And essentially that results in a lot of deals being done, right? So it's throughout that sort of first couple of months of the crisis, there was a crazy amount of issuance in the debt capital markets. And as companies have exhausted that, as they've already sort of been through that process of raising a lot of debt, they get to a point where they're quite leveraged, and now they're looking to raise further money through equity capital markets. So then you saw a big phase of companies looking to raise money through equity capital markets. So absolutely by no means has COVID impacted the sort of the business of investment banks in a negative way. It's been the other way around, right? Because now more than ever do firms need access to capital, and that's what investment banks are there to provide. And from a sales and trading perspective as well, right? There's so much volatility in the market, and what is completely spiked. If you look at any asset classes, especially within equities, after March, volatility is completely spiked, and that's what people trade on. That's what hedge funds trade on. They need that volatility to trade and to make money, right? So from a pure vol perspective, investment banks have seen a crazy amount of flow business coming in from these asset management firms and these hedge funds. And on either side, for those that need their positions to be hedged, because there's so much volatility in the markets in every area. A hedge fund might be looking at their book being sort of increasing and decreasing by a crazy amount of percentage, and then therefore they might need people to hedge some of that exposure. And again, investment banks step in and they hedge that exposure for you. So all in all, across I think all divisions, COVID has been sort of very positive in a way, in terms of looking at from the perspective that firms have needed investment banks now more than ever, and therefore business has been it's been a record year across the banks.
And again, this is an opportunity. Even if I would be absolutely shocked if an interview question in the next few months was not, how do you think COVID has impacted the industry? And if it's not a question, it should be something that you mentioned yourself. I can see that you've had a record year. It's very interesting that COVID has impacted you in X, Y, and Z, low interest rates, investors needing more capital, and you sort of showing your knowledge of investment bank through that. So, I mean, that's an absolute essential. And if investment banks have had a record year, they're going to want more people to continue increasing their business. So again, it comes back to, COVID should be seen really as an opportunity, not sort of a bad thing, if anything.
Thanks for that, guys. I think this is an appropriate junction to kind of explain what GradGurus as an organization provides tangibly. And one of the key aspects here is a lot of you will be going through your application process, whether that's interviews, psychometric testings, assessment center. One of the key things that we provide is one-on-one support, being mentorship. So I would highly recommend you guys to reach out to us. We'll share our links and details on the post of seminar and the webinar, and you'll be able to kind of have booking time with one of us individually, just to kind of have some guidance, some mentorship. So I think that's really key. I would highlight though, because obviously, like for example, right now we have 40 odd participants. We might not necessarily have the capacity to reach out to everyone. So I'll really highlight and stress the importance of getting there as soon as possible on a first come, first served basis. Other than kind of one-to-one mentorships, we also do CV reviews. We're going to do a lot more webinars like these, but focusing on more on the actual application process. So demystifying psychometric tests, etc., how to be successful in assessment centers. So in terms of what you could do in the interim, you have a lot of options. Once you're in your application process, reach out to us and we can definitely help you and secure those graduate jobs you're looking for. And also just generally, don't be shy to reach out to us on email as well. On one of the slides, we've also got a WhatsApp number which you could message across on a very informally basis as well. And as Zen stressed out right from the beginning, networking is really important. So utilize us as a network opportunity. Moving back to some of the actual question and answers, and we will end shortly. I've got a question here, and again, I'll put this towards you, Zen, especially given that you're still in that graduate job position. I'm interning for JP Morgan this summer, but I like to recruit for other finance/real estate positions, so I can have multiple choices if I receive an offer from them. When should I be interviewing or recruiting?
So, I mean, it's okay if you have an internship with JP Morgan. Firstly, that's going to look really good on your CV. So make sure you leverage that when you're applying to other places. Secondly, don't let it stop you. I don't know how long your internship is. Suppose it's 9 weeks and your summer's taken, then obviously don't apply for the internship at the same time. But go do the internship and apply for anything else in the meantime that doesn't clash with that internship. There's absolutely no commitment from you at this point in time to say that you will definitely go for a grad job with them if they offer you a grad job, or that you will take on any opportunity they give you. There's absolutely no commitment at this stage. So literally leverage that experience and apply it anywhere elsewhere that you think is interesting. There's absolutely nothing stopping you. I wouldn't hesitate from applying elsewhere for sure.
Thanks for that, Zain. An interesting question here for you, Ahmed. Are there any certifications I can get to help my application, as I'm currently doing a computer science with management degree? So any professional qualifications or any ad hoc certifications that could boost a person's application?
So I'll try and split this into two. If you want to go directly into investment banking, and if you want to take, say, my approach, which is to, for example, work in external audit and then maybe make the move to investment banking in the future. So if you take the approach that I have, then obviously I've done the chartered accounting qualification, and there's a reasonably large number of investment banking analysts, associates who start off as auditors, as tax associates, and eventually move their way into the world of investment banking. The reason the investment banks really like that is because we have that accounting background, the tax background. We can read financial statements quite easily. We've got a little bit of a different, maybe more of a technical background. And I'm obviously sure that, if you listen to what Zain is saying, he's obviously very technical as well. If you're going to go directly into an investment bank, they're not looking necessarily for you to have a qualification. They are going to ask you technical questions in the interview. That's for certain. I would like maybe Zain to give an example, but examples which I've come across is explain to me the concept of the cost of capital. Now, again, you might have studied Chinese or computer science. They're still going to expect you to have that knowledge. So really what I would do if you're going to go into an investment bank is learn what is a financial statement, how do companies invest, what is WACC, what is sell side, what is buy side, build up your knowledge, purchase a textbook, investment banking textbook, an accounting textbook, a tax textbook, really build up your knowledge as much as you can. In the accounting and tax sphere, they're not as technical in their interviews, but like I said, investment banking, they definitely are. So if you're going to apply directly to investment banks to sort of conclude, I would focus less on a qualification as such and more on your investment banking knowledge, which even though they're going to teach you when you join the investment bank, they're still going to expect you to know. And if you're in my position where you're planning on joining an investment bank later on in your career, then I would focus on maybe doing the chartered accounting, the CFA, chartered financial advisor, and then moving on into that sphere. But again, Zain, I mean, maybe you can give some sort of technical questions that you've got in interviews to sort of explain why it's so important to have that technical knowledge.
Yeah, and I mean, this specifically depends on the role that you're applying for and the bank that you're applying for, because some banks are known to ask some very technical questions, whereas others are sort of focused on different types of questions. So suppose you're applying for a sales and trading role within markets. The one question you absolutely always get is talk about the markets right now. So you should be able to comfortably sit down and say, okay, listen, this is what's happening on a broad spectrum across different asset classes. But if I should, and then they could sort of narrow you down into a particular asset class. So they could be like, okay, within FX, talk to me about what's happening in EM rates at the moment, or EM currencies at the moment, emerging markets currencies at the moment. They could ask you about, okay, if you're going to look at commodities, okay, what's happening with oil industry? What's been driving prices of oil for the past year? And more importantly than that, tell me what do you think it will drive the prices of oil next year, and how do you think it'll be affected? And there's no right and wrong answer for this, by the way, when you're looking into the future, when you're giving an outlook, because no one really knows, right? If someone knew that they'd be a millionaire, that's a real thing, right? You don't need to know how it's actually what oil price is gonna be next year, but you need to have a view, and you need to have strong fundamental reasons behind that view. So you need to have like, okay, listen, I think that there's going to be a huge amount of demand, or there's going to be supply issues caused by particular country ramping up production or reducing supply because of particular reason. Whatever it is, you need to have those fundamental reasons for why this asset class might move one way or the other way. And you can also expect to get questions more looking at towards equities. So it could be like, pitch me a company stock, pitch me a trade idea. And again, it's not about whether you're right or whether you're wrong. It's more about your fundamental reason for pitching that stock. You should be able to have a view on that company that I think, okay, this company is overvalued or undervalued right now, and three reasons why. And you should know that company inside out. So if they were to ask you follow-up questions, i.e., like, who are the main competitors in the industry? What sort of numbers are the ratios are the competitors trading at? Is this company overvalued when you look at it from a DCF perspective, or when you look at it from comparables perspective? Why is it overvalued? You need to have answers to all those questions. You need to be an expert in whatever you're pitching them. So generally speaking, I'd say like prepare at least 2 stock pitches. Because there's been incidents in the past where someone's like pitch a stock, and the guys, like the trader's been like, oh, I don't like this stock, pitch me another one, and you can be thrown back and you're like, well, okay, I didn't prepare another one, you prepared one. And then have like maybe 1 or 2 like trade ideas from a macro perspective, i.e. like FX product that you might have. From an IBD perspective, you're going to get questions more along the lines of financial statements and most of accounting and finance type questions. So you're going to get asked questions, okay, what is a DCF model? Walk me through a DCF model. What the 3 sort of main financial statements. You're probably going to get those questions. But another commonality that you will get across probably all investment banks and across all roles and divisions is quick maths questions, as well as brain teasers. Brain teasers are very, very common within investment banks now, like very common. Almost every single interview will have some brain teasers. Especially my firm is like very famous for having like at least 3, 4, 5 brain teasers per interview. And these could be sort of anything. I mean, there's the famous Rubik's Cube question where you have a 10 by 10 by 10 Rubik's Cube and you paint the outside of the Rubik's Cube red. And they ask you, okay, which one of the small Rubik's Cubes, i.e. like the 1 by 1 by 1 Rubik's Cube, cube within the big Rubik's Cube, how many of those don't have any red paint on them? Because the idea is if you're painting the outside red, all of the cubes inside the actual Rubik's Cube don't have any red paint on them. And there's a way of working out that. And I mean, you can practice these sort of questions. Market sizing questions are very, very common as well, right? So they will throw you off randomly by asking you. I mean, some of the questions I've had is like, how many marriages happen in 1 year in Germany? Or, how many people walk through the Heathrow airport in 1 day? Or how many light bulbs are there in New York? How many red Ferraris will there be in Manchester? All of these questions, like I've had them in the past, and you will for sure get these type of questions. But the key thing to note with these questions, with these market sizing questions, is that there is no wrong answer. The only thing they're testing you right now is your thought process, and they're putting you under pressure. That's it. The person interviewing you will not know how many light bulbs are in New York. He will not know how many red Ferraris are in Manchester. There's no way. He won't know, right? The only thing he's testing right now is to see how you go about that question. One way would be like you completely panic and you're like, whoa, I have no idea how many red Ferraris there might be in Manchester, or I have no idea how many marriages might happen in a year in Germany. And you can completely freeze, and that's it. And that's what they don't want. Or you could just sit back and approach the question from like a more logical perspective, and you could think about, okay, so what's the population in Germany? Maybe you don't know that, right? You know the population in the UK probably. Yeah, okay, well, I know generally that Germany is just a little bit bigger than the UK, and therefore I expect maybe like roughly they might have like a bit more population. Roughly, I'd say maybe 10% more population in Germany than the UK. And it's okay for you to make those guesses, right? If you don't know the population of Germany, that doesn't mean you're not going to be a good investment banker, right? But you just need to have a thought process, just any idea of maybe guessing the population of Germany. From that, okay, what sort of age group would people be? Okay, is Germany maybe, are most people young there? Are most people towards the old side? Okay, what's the average age that people get married? Okay, maybe from my friends, from my experience, I know that people tend to get married at the age of 30. Okay, so then start looking at that. And okay, how many 30-year-olds might there be in Germany? Okay, what percentage of those people, the average age of getting married is 30, so how many people will be turning 30 next year, right? Try and figure out a way for getting to that number. And then be like, okay, well, 2 people get married together, that makes 1 marriage, because 2 people getting married is 1 marriage, and you divide that by 2. And then maybe just start adding little complexities on that. Okay, maybe there's people that are divorced but get married at a second time. Okay, divorce rate might be, from my experience, it might be like 10% in a particular country or 20% in the country. And then you add those on top, and you add those layers of complexities until you've got sort of a decent answer that you've gotten to. And that's the approach that you should have with every single interview question, every single brain teaser that you get. is that you don't need to know the right answer. You just need to approach it from a logical perspective. And as long as you have that logic, you could be off by 1 million, you could be off by 10 million, 100 million, doesn't matter. It's just about whether you approach it logically. And yeah, and last of the questions would be like maths question. They'll definitely like, I mean, I've had interviews where I've been just talking to like a director, just having a nice chat, and it's like, how's your day going? And the next is like, well, so what's 17 times 17? And they're just kind of staring at you. And again, like Ahmed said before, like, it's not that you can't do, if you give someone unlimited time to do 17 times 17, they will do it. It's about putting you under pressure and seeing how you respond. And again, the key tip I'd give is just literally calm down for a second. Like, don't be thrown off, okay, I don't know the answer, and work through it step by step. So, and do it out loud. Don't do it in your head. If you do it in your head and they sat there in silence looking at you while you're doing maths in your head, it's going to be very awkward. Start by doing your various, okay, so what's 17 times 10? Okay, so what's 17 times 5? Okay, what's 17 times 3? Okay, 17 times 10 is this, times by 2 gives me this, so that's 17 times 20. Now what's 17 times 3? Okay, let me subtract the two numbers together to get to 17 times 7. Right, just do it step by step, very so you don't need to rush it. You don't need to give the answer in 5 seconds. It's not, so that's not your test. Your test is just to stay calm and you know, approach it logically and get the right answer in this case. But yeah, those are the type of questions that you would expect to get in investment banking interviews across different firms, for sure.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Zain. That was some really interesting questions and a bit of insight into the interview stage. We're actually going to wrap up the webinar there now. But before we do, I've just got a couple of requests. We got another poll, so please, if you can fill out this end of event poll. In order to access it, you need to, I'm not sure what you see from your screen, but when you click the poll button, there's a drop down list at the top, and if you click on the second poll, the purpose of this poll is just to get feedback on how you think we did, what type of future events you want, just to kind of really tailor future events towards you. I mentioned some of the events that we got lined up is demystifying psychometric testing. Hopefully one of our intention is in a post-COVID environment, we want to get an actual live physical event where we're at a venue and we go through full application process and break it down for you. But obviously, given the COVID restrictions, we kind of limited to digital and online learning. Secondly, I would just like to thank our panelists, Zain, Abrar, Ahmed as well, and also Mohammed, who's dropped off for the time and the taking time out to spend on this Saturday afternoon. Really appreciate you guys' efforts. And lastly, our thanks to the attendees. Really appreciate you guys tuning into us. Obviously, we said 2 o'clock and we've gone a bit over. Hopefully, you did find that useful. And then just to reiterate my earlier points, please do reach out to us on GradGurus. You have our online website, we have our Instagram. Reach out to us, drop us an email, build that networks from the start. This was actually our second event as a GradGurus. The first one we had as part of our breaking into a specific profession. The first one was breaking into the Big Four, so a lot more accountancy and tax related. This one was more investment banking, and we intend to have future events similar of that nature. So keep your eyes peeled out, and definitely, hopefully we'll stay in touch in the future. But that's everything from my side. Cheers. Thanks, guys.